Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody. This is Peter Joseph, February 18th, 2015, the Zeitgeist Movement Global Radio. Sorry, it's been a while since I've been back here. Things have been tight time-wise with all of us. As a volunteer movement, it's quite trying to keep things going. It's a very stressful environment out there in the world, as I think many of us are experiencing. This is going to be a short broadcast. I'm trying to get back into play so I can do 30-minute segments every week or every other week when other people are not around, of course. Keep the rotation going as best we can, but I'd like to get back to communicating as I did. I suppose it was 2 years ago, in fact, that I was ever consistent with this, which again is shocking time-wise. Speaking of time, we're at the 7th annual Z-Day, 2015, Berlin, Germany. It should be a tremendously good event. We've got a lot of great speakers and a lot of people coming from afar. So I'm excited about it. We also have the Z-Day map at zdayglobal.org, which is slowly populating with other international events. If anyone out there has not submitted an event, I really hope you can. It really makes a big difference, even if it's just a screening or a small talk or a gathering. It really does make a difference to keep this awareness going. That is really the purpose of the Zeitgeist Movement in a lot of ways through its chapter functions. People often ask, well, what is the Zeitgeist Movement? And we can put all the ideology aside for a second and see that the chapter structure and the social interaction is everything. If this movement can't communicate itself well, then we might as well just give up. But we haven't given up because we've actually done very well. It's very impressive. We're on our 7th year of Z-Day. So that is pretty much all I'm going to say about it. I mean, James Phillips ran down the list of people that will be talking at this event, including myself and many others. And the subject matter and everything else can be found at zdayglobal.org. Please go visit it if you're new to the movement and learn about it. This particular broadcast is going to be simply about questions. The questions were taken from the Global Movement Forum, as were solicited about a week ago. The questions will end, they were taken and extracted and downloaded, I should say, at 5:30 on Tuesday Pacific time. If anyone posted questions after that, they won't be seen. I also had to paraphrase a lot of these because people are writing multi-paragraph questions, which would simply take too much time to read in full here on the podcast. So I hope that's okay. I've done my best with that. Here we go. Question 1. Peter, how do you go about inspiring people to gain more education? You've inspired me to learn a lot about biology, psychology, and other sciences, but I can't seem to inspire others to do so. I feel like it is the first step in understanding that change is necessary, and I need advice to help spread the word. Well, media is the art of communication. As a filmmaker, I find that to be my greatest strength, which is why I'm honing in on filmmaking stuff over the course of the next couple of years with the new film trilogy I'm doing. You have to balance intellectual presentation with communication skill, and to me, art is the greatest way to do that. It sneaks behind your ego, as I've said before. You know, common ground is really the ultimate issue, though. You know, if I'm talking to a diehard libertarian, if I'm talking to a Christian, if I'm talking to someone who's of a nationalist disposition, or someone who might even have a racial bigoted disposition, I try to ignore any cognitive dissonance I have about their worldview, and I try to engage them as human beings on the lowest base level. And if you do that, you find that everyone has their baggage, everyone has their problems and their nuances and bad propensities, but you can find common ground with this. You know, people talk about truth. There's a thing that was called the truth movement years ago, which had to do with a lot of things in the States regarding government corruption. It embraced a lot of things that were, unfortunately, in a derisive manner, were condemned as, quote, conspiracy theorists and the like, when they're really just people that were upset about the world around them and didn't believe and were very skeptical about the things they were told by the government about multiple things. And when you talk to people like this and you want to present a more scientifically balanced worldview and get them on board, you describe that science is the ultimate truth-seeking mechanism. It's all about truth. It's all about figuring out what is actually happening in the world. If you're dealing with someone of a Christian or anyone in Judeo-Christian Islamic philosophies, they will have a deeply tribalistic identification usually. As an aside, there was a film called American Sniper that came out a little bit ago, which had got a great deal of criticism from, I guess, the so-called left, if you will, because of how it depicted this heroism, excuse me, this heroinism, this hero aspect, I can't speak today, that essentially put a serial killer who is a sniper in a coveted position of saving people. And within this particular context of saving his tribe, he's considered a hero, even though the larger order context of an illegal invasion against a sovereign nation and killing people that are trying to protect themselves and are in extreme fear of these outsiders is of no recourse. It's not an issue because he's protecting his own. So it's that tribalistic family thing. And you see this throughout all religious ideologies. So you begin that angle as well, to show that it is a human family. If everyone believes that they are representative of God and all of God's children, which I'm not really sure, apart from the bigotry, of course, that you see between religions, which is another subject, but everyone loosely in these principled ways likes to believe that everyone can convert and everyone is God's children and the like. Well, you can use that against them, so to speak, when you begin to identify nature and how we all share the planet and we all need to share resources. And how can anyone talk about democratic equality and not eventually allude to economic equality, especially in the world today where it's extremely feasible? A lot can be said on that, going back to slave societies and the way you rationalized imbalance. We live today in a slavery system that has been developed and softened over time, but is still based on the fundamental principle of the non-people, the unpeople, or however George Orwell put it, where we can look at these class structures and we can just look at people as inferior, and the entire social architecture of market capitalism supports that worldview, of course. So, I think I've deviated from your question with an elegant, typical PJ tangent. So, the issue comes down to bridging and common ground. That's really all I can say about it. You have to get people inspired about wanting to learn about these issues. You have to make it something that they can relate to. It can't be like I was taught, for example, mathematics and physical science in high school, where they gave no real reference. There was nothing inspiring about it. To this day, I have a almost subconscious irritation when it comes to mathematics because of how much I couldn't stand it in high school, and it took me to get out of college to really begin to appreciate what mathematics was and represented, and the beauty of it in its understanding, the elegance, and framing our world in this representative way. So if you can glean that inspiration, you can break through. So I hope that helps. Now, question 2, I'm really sorry, but I did not understand the way it was written. It was written in broken English. I'll read the first sentence. As TZM and big activist, I still find hard to convince people about unlink employment from the right to exist by having basic needs guaranteed. Now, I think the question is, how do you convince people that a world without labor for income can work? So I'm going to answer it on that basis. First of all, there's no such thing as earning a living, or you get what you work for, I should say, because all the mechanisms have been evolved generationally that we utilize. All the tools, all the equipment, everything is a social construct over generational time. So you don't, in order to say that you get what you work for, which is what a lot of this comes down to, you'd have to say that everyone actually creates all the mechanisms that they utilize from scratch, and that's crazy. We have automation now that we have culminated as a species over time, which can do work faster, better, and more efficiently than we can, and can also inch into the creation of abundance. We have the advance of material technology and a tremendous organizational efficiency that has created what's called dematerialization, or as Buckminster Fuller called it, ephemeralization. These things are tremendous, and they can basically make our labor and our mechanisms, especially the market economy mechanism, obsolete and actually negative, working against progress, working against abundance at this stage, which is exactly what it does. So if you can teach people about that, that's great. You also need to bring up the fact that transitionally, labor for income is on its way out on its own accord, because automation is proving to be more cost efficient. This has been talked about at tremendous length, so I'm not going to go through it here in any more detail. If anyone wants to have a lot of detail on that, they can watch 3 Questions, What Do You Propose? A video I made a number of months back that challenges the audience to think about 3 different phenomenon that are occurring, and without showing solutions, just to ask what any free-thinking, critical, thought-minded person would propose on their own, given the logic presented. So yes, the idea of removing labor for income is very scary to people because they instantly flash back to some kind of strange central planning Soviet-style thing. Let's cover that real briefly. This is not a central planned hierarchical pyramid structure. Both Soviet communism and capitalism as it exists now were pyramid structures. They had to do with power trickling down in your traditional corporate concept. Even the ones that advocated no money back in early Soviet communism advocated central planning from the top down. What you want is actually a parallel, overlapping type of society where there's as much centralization in the sense of, as much independence and decentralization as it goes forward. It's weird how those words can be used different ways. You want to centralize as much as you can in one area, but you want to decentralize it from reliance on the rest of the environment. As many may know, the Internet of Things, the IoT, which has been talked about at length by numerous people, it's really become quite popular in the technology community, where we're going to be able to put sensors on just about everything and begin to monitor things in a much more complicated and efficient way. This is an enormous topic. Please look up the Internet of Things if you've never heard of it. It's precisely what has been talked about in the Zeitgeist Movement for a long time with respect to how we can bypass the price mechanism, this thing that's been held up as the ultimate defense of the market, and how socialism can't work, so to speak, using, of course, the old definition of socialism. This is now moot, or I should say, this is now overcome because yes, we can monitor everything and monitor supply, demand, value, scarcity, and all the things that price does in real time, immediately, with about 1,000 times more productive efficiency than we see with the slow lag of the price mechanism. So I've deviated a bit on that one, but all that comes together to show that it's exceedingly inefficient for us and working against human progress to maintain the labor for income system at this time. Question 3. I have the opportunity to work with people from all groups and ages, from all over Europe and in all fields. I talk about TZM to them and they like the idea. Most of them know this system is broken, the current system, and are familiar with things talked about, even though they've never heard of TZM. They are also skeptical. A professor of physics in Germany said to me, quote, "When my grandfather was a little boy, there were rumors in our village that a man could fly with an airplane made of wood. Everyone laughed in denial till one day an airplane flew over our village. Show me and the world the plane and we will believe you," closed quote. My question to you is, shouldn't it be a priority of TZM to actually do something rather than talk about it? I understand your frustration. I get it, because I know that people want to see something tangible. But I also am firmly grounded in the sad reality that the type of architectural creations and city test systems and the like that would need to be constructed physically would cost such an enormous amount of money, and in fact probably would need even political influence to get done, that we are simply not there yet with respect to general populace interests. People don't know what they want as far as solutions, and that's the big problem and why activism is so important. I know that sounds frustrating. There's plenty of people that come into the movement. They want to see things getting built. I advocate the GRI, Global Redesign Institute concept, which will be, I think there's another question about that later. These virtual means are simply more cost efficient in order to try and show the world what's possible. If you can't communicate to the world what's possible, then we really can't do anything. So I would take a little offense to the idea that you'd say that we're not doing anything. I mean, what is all this about? Why am I even talking to you right now? Why do we have Z days every year? The mission is spreading and people are changing, but the learning curve is staggering. It doesn't take someone to walk into a billion-dollar test facility to see these fundamental principles, these in basically what are inferential concepts put forward additively to show what this new social system is comprised of. These can be realized. People reading the Zeitgeist Movement Defined book should be able to put this together very, very easily in their mind. There's a value system problem, of course. There is a learning curve. You have to establish a new vocabulary, and you certainly have to establish a new worldview. But we are doing a great deal. So talking about it and communicating is everything. Even the building of a city is actually a form of communication. And not to mention that all floodgates are open for input. I advocate a virtual concept to start. Some people advocate showing specific technology and people that are doing things within the market, food systems or Kickstarters for new devices that can help dematerialize and show the pattern, robotics. I would love to see someone finally start the very first automated bar restaurant to really show that you don't need to waste people's lives. It just dawned on me. I remember doing the Joe Rogan show, and afterwards I ran into him and his assistant Brian at a drugstore, and they were there and they were making fun as they always do, and they went up and bought something, and Joe turned to his friend and said, "Hey, listen, in his society we wouldn't be able to do this." And my response was, "Well, in our society, there wouldn't be someone scanning gum for a living." See, there's a selfishness that's inherent to everything that is portrayed in this system, and we have to overcome that and begin to see the holistic view. This is a slight tangent, but it's very important. So, coming back to your question, I honestly believe that projects will arise, and they will come, and it will be kind of unpredictable. The efficiencies have already been talked about. The Internet of Things is already being talked about. Dematerialization, the idea of abundance. There's a lot of ignorance in these conversations. I am very frustrated by what I call the techno-capitalist apologists that actually believe you're going to see these types of radical abundance-producing changes within a system while we have absolute wage stagnation, we have absolute austerity, we have absolute debt collapse across the world, we have rampant poverty and homelessness. It's just ridiculous what's happening across the entire sphere of problems, within the sphere of problems. And these guys that sit back and are just in their nice chairs and their first-class plane tickets about, oh yeah, we're going to have abundance soon. They're just full of shit. The political ramifications and the social ramifications of the way the order is working right now are so stifling that even the most optimistic worldview about what technology is offering populations at this time are banal at best. I mean, I love these guys that use examples such as cell phones. Oh, well, they have cell phones now in Africa, and that's great. But you know what? They don't even have running water in a lot of places in Africa. They might have cell phones, but they don't even have latrines. Is that progress? Yeah, they might be able to engage some micro banking while they fight off E. coli and all the simple diseases that come from not even having clean water. So anyway, I'll stop that tangent. Where's the next question? Now, the next question is about 18 paragraphs long. Thank you very much. I have read it, and it deals with sexual relationships, dimorphism. It deals with hypergamy. Tell you what, I'm just going to read one section or two paragraphs of it. This is the question. See, for an economy to be based on resources and natural law, the nature of human sexual dimorphism and the macro relationship between men and women must be recognized and understood. The biological, physical, psychological, and statistical differences between men and women must be acknowledged so that human beings can come into harmony with truth and their own nature, so humans can reach their full potential and have positive relationships and procreate efficiently, free of economic codependency and the associated neuroses. However, currently, human sexual dimorphism is always discussed in so-called social sciences in a political way. It is usually discussed in terms of gender issues that always portray women as the oppressed class in an oversimplified way and promotes the idea that gender roles are purely social constructs absent of biological influence. And this narrative politically expedient and fuels the economic system in many ways too numerous to go into. So I'm going to stop there. These are observations, not questions. What I'd like to say about it is that if you look at primate species, if we take an anthropological perspective, you will see gender roles perform consistently across most primate species. There are differences, of course. Baboon culture, as noted by anthropologist, neurologist Dr. Robert Sapolsky from Stanford, he's talked about at length how there are exceptions that are made while baboons higher in the hierarchy will attract and have more control over females below them. There are plenty of exceptions that show that mating will occur without recognition of this hierarchy. There are Other examples where you can just simply think about human culture and different pockets of behavior throughout the world. While you will see a kind of paternalistic male dominance throughout a lot of the world, especially those that are inclined to religious custom, you will also see plenty of exceptions where they do not exist. And these exceptions are what basically define progress as far as I'm concerned. You can easily, of course, walk into any bar and see these very primal reactions and dominance and puffed up chests. And on the other reverse, you have the over-sexualized female form, highly manipulated by advertising. And at the same time, when it comes to manipulation, it works across both sides. I mean, we live in a scarcity-driven social order. Women have been oppressed, but at the same time, they have a lot of power over men because of their sexual fruits. And that leads both sides to engage in a gaming strategy. There was a report that came out that said that women would marry for about $3 million on average. So would that happen in the same parallel if women lived in a resource-based economy, if male and females shared a society not based on this level of deprivation? I don't think it would. Also, hierarchy and status-driven things and competition, sexual competition, is extremely diverse when you really look at it. While we're clouded with the hierarchy created by economics and how important that is and the security that creates. I mean, there's no mystery as to why people are attracted to others that have a lot of money. It creates security. It's really obvious. And of course, there's the neuroses and conditioning that they must be a success too, because to have a lot of money, you're therefore a universal success at something and increases your value and status. But my point is that there are numerous types of hierarchy, and I think everyone's finds success by whatever definition to be attractive. People doing things and not sitting on their couch and doing nothing and progressing at nothing and having no interests and having a limited sense of experience. I don't know anyone that says that's what they're attracted to. So there's some truth to wanting to be around people that have something creative or something ambitious to do or say. And in that context, there's endless types of hierarchies. You can have a guy that's a janitor at a corporation during the week, at the absolute lowest state of the economic ladder, and no little control, economically poor, and then they happen to be one of the greatest softball players in their hometown. And they have accolades and they are very much respected because of their success in that element. So you can stretch that across anything. So I hope that helps. You've asked a very complicated question, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm an authority on any of it, but I would see a great deal of alleviation in gender relations once we get out of this type of hierarchical system, because again, it reinforces so many primal attributes. It's so locked into the old status notion of true power and dominance over each other that to think that racism or the general bigotry inherent would subside on its own is naive. The system has to be transcended for these types of neurotic associations to finally go away. Okay, question 5. I've condensed this. My question is about chapter coordinators and not really about how things will work in a new society. I don't know about anybody else, but it makes logical sense, and I know social issues, along with all the other detrimental problems we face, will gradually work itself out. But back to the coordinators, I've talked to a couple of chapter coordinators in the U.S., and not only is it them, but other people within TZM that seem really extreme when they become intolerant to everything they think is wrong and start judging everyone to the point where comments such as, "If you eat meat, you're not in TZM," and also from another coordinator saying, "If you drink and smoke, you're not awake." I understand where their beliefs come from, but honestly, to criticize and judge like that, especially within the group, seems counterproductive and a bit hostile. End of acknowledgement. Yes, my friend, I couldn't agree more with this tendency for people to get uppity and arrogant about their own values and using the platform of the movement to basically degrade people that we're trying to bring together. I have a very personal problem with that. I've been outspoken about that over the course of the past year, 2 years, trying to keep an equilibrium and a general diverse sense of the movement, meaning that we accept contradictory views within people within the movement. Any chapter coordinator out there that says that lines should be drawn about what beliefs the movement should share really needs to think about what the focus is. Obviously, we need people to accept the foundation, understand the nature of a natural law resource-based economy and all the things that go along with it. That is clearly defined, of course, in the book, The Zeitgeist Movement Defined. If someone doesn't agree with the Zeitgeist Movement defined, then maybe the movement isn't for them. But beyond that, there are a large range of issues that really just need to be they can be talked about, but they just need to be more or less ignored if we expect to have any luck in galvanizing a community to affect social change in the way that's required. I guess I'd put it this way: where are the priorities? What is your priority to anyone listening who identifies with the movement? Do you see why the grand focus of getting rid of this system is really at the heart of the alleviation of a vast spectrum of social problems? We can talk about all sorts of direct issues currently happening, from the propensity of war to the abuse of the biosphere, to vast arrays of human suffering and poverty and deprivation and mental disorder. And we could sit around and think about targeted things to do to try and help all those issues, just as there are numerous NPOs and nonprofits out there doing just that. But that isn't what the Zeitgeist Movement is. The whole point of the Zeitgeist Movement is the big picture view. Let's get rid of the social system and show the world what we can replace it with, which is highly feasible, logical, and, as esoteric as it may sound, or as fringe as it may sound, actually quite practical when it's actually all arranged. So I'll conclude by saying that having tolerance or understanding and patience for those that you might disagree with in their general day-to-day behavior, but yet are in support of this larger social shift, is very important. Respecting our differences in the climate that we're in and the dire circumstance that we're in is extremely important, as it's strategic to maintain a galvanized community that has a common goal. I don't know how anyone could ever expect anything that we're promoting to ever achieve anything if we didn't take that general worldview. Does that mean we accept anything and everything as a form of premise, an association of the movement? Absolutely not. We're not a racist movement, obviously. That goes completely against the diction. We don't accept neo-Nazis or white supremacists or any fringe. In fact, you naturally weed out all those folks because the fundamental premise is based on human unity. And again, all the things that have been clearly defined over the past 6 years. So I'll stop there. So I'm already at the half-hour mark here. I got to plow along. Question 6. Peter, have you ever heard of Esperanto? And if so, what are your thoughts of the language, the concept, and why it did not become successful? Also, are you a vegan? As far as Esperanto, I'm sorry, I'd have to plead ignorance on it ultimately. I know of it, I've seen it, it's been used in various circumstances. I'm aware of it, but I don't really have much of an opinion on it. So I'm ignorant of it. I'll try to learn more about it. There's only so much my tiny brain and diminishing time can allow me to understand. As far as being vegan, I would say I'm mostly vegan. I don't really draw nutritional lines in these frameworks that have been constructed by culture, where you're a meat eater or you're a vegetarian, which of course people that claim to be vegetarians still eat fish, never understood why that term applied. And of course there's vegan, where you don't eat any animal production whatsoever. From a moral standpoint, I'm horrified by what industry has turned into. But at the same time, there's relativism to it, because animals are a part of the life cycle of humans and have been for a very long time. Indigenous cultures took great honor and cherished the animals that they raised to continue the feeding process. Life feeds on life, and you end up with a spectrum of moral quandaries when you try to decide. It's a moral continuum problem, and I'm not sure if I have time to really go into what that means when it comes to the respect of other forms of life, because clearly it's subjective at a certain point. I've known plenty of vegans in New York. I was friends with plenty of vegans, and yet they were active in killing the mice that invaded and infested the rats, and I should say that infested their homes. They would come up with their various excuses, but then again, they're still killing things if they're a vegan because of moral principles. I mean, mice, they laugh. Mice are ticklish. Mice have feelings. Mice play. And the farther you go down the animal hierarchy, somewhere along the line, a subjective line is drawn. And this type of relativism becomes far too complicated to address, and which is why the concept of morality exists at all, is because you're stuck on a relativistic continuum. So to me, the resolution in logic is to find a larger order degree of relevance. You need to use the higher systems awareness and say, well, is there another context that can decide what's better or worse? And if humans can adapt to a completely vegetarian-based diet, then it would certainly be more sustainable from a agricultural perspective. That's science is very clear on that with respect to sustainability, given current practices, that moving away from the vast, polluting, animal-based agriculture, which dominates a great deal of the land out there that's being used for agriculture right now, and moved away from that into only vegetarian-based agriculture, the world would definitely be better off when it comes to resources, pollution, and general efficiency. So there's your broad view. And as a final note on the issue, I'll say that I hope that in vitro meats, which have already come into fruition, they've already produced artificial meats with good success. These things, I think, will prevail, and the entire moral quandary will subside, while also preserving nutritional aspects and lifestyle aspects that will maintain some continuity. Question number 7. Peter, what do you think is the reason TZM has seen a drop in active members, and how might this situation be reversed? Well, the reason is that it's exhausting, and it has very little direct reward. And the only thing that keeps the movement together, or I would say that should be keeping the movement together, is a pleasant atmosphere and a sense of camaraderie where people are both accepting of their differences and, of course, embracing each other with the common theme and common interest. A movement like this has to have a connection. I have so much courage is out there, man. When I look at the heroes of the movement are not the people that do these radio shows and do their lectures. They're the real heroes are the ones that are sitting in a small town somewhere with 4 people, and they've been doing it for a year, and they're still active and still having meetings and Z-days and even town halls. And they have the courage to continue to move forward against very little excitement and perhaps even adversity. TZM is not a social network, it's not a club. It's a very serious institution working to break through to the general public by whatever means we can. And I see the ebb and flow of people coming in and out of the movement of this nature, given its minor sense of reward, given the fact that it's all volunteer, as natural. And I think the movement's also way ahead of its time. The hype that the movement hit was a false encouragement, I think, early on. It was on the back of a very popular filmic experience. It skyrocketed to an enormous amount of interest initially, to the extent where it was almost unmanageable, enormous amounts of hate and negative press and trolling simultaneously, and then it's subsided and it's become more concentrated. The membership in and of itself has become more aware rather than being just out there in numbers. It's bothersome to see people that are willing to give up after just a short period of time, but at the same time, this is the nature of it. This is what's to be expected. Those dedicated to the Zeitgeist Movement wear it on their shoulders. They don't sit there and have some expectation. They're not there for a power play. They do it because it's principally correct, and they wouldn't be able to live with themselves if they weren't trying to communicate ideas of this nature that would improve their well-being and the well-being of others. This is our basic empathic and social nature coming forward to problem solve. So, in other words, I don't value the movement based on how many people are in the movement. I value the movement because of its ideas and its importance. And if everyone thought that way and stopped with this group motivated, almost sheepish quality where they say, well, if a lot of people aren't doing that, then I guess I won't do it. Well, that's not cool. That type of mentality is part of the problem. If you believe in it, you'll push forward. And I think it's just a matter of time before people see the merit of this. Again, we're way ahead of our time. Question 8. I would like you to explain your view on free will. On a recent interview, you assert there's no such thing as free will. In another recent quote, you said it is up to us. These statements seem to be contradictory of each other. That is a wonderful paradoxical observation, since the whole concept of describing free will is paradoxical. Describing our own lack of activity while we are being active and seemingly conscious is inherently paradoxical. Um, the issue of free will comes down to the way we think, what we think, our ability to recall, the reality that we have very little control over the influences that comprise our consciousness. These things have been talked about at length, but at the same time, we're stuck in a chain reaction. I would liken free will to the decision to choose between multiple chairs you have in front of you. If there's 4 chairs, you can choose between either 1, 2, 3, or 4. But within that, there's a logic to why you would choose one chair over another, which of course comes down to conditioning. It could even come down to certain biological issues, depending on if things are in proximation to those chairs that trigger biological nuances. I would argue that both biology and culture come into play when you're arguing free will, because you do have immediate, hardwired, high propensity reactions that can occur. They can be inhibited. Our consciousness can inhibit our behaviors. But again, we're stuck in this paradox of why we make any decisions we do, or any of our thoughts our own, and so on and so forth. Now, you'll find when I talk about free will, I typically put it in the context of the way society looks at itself, and this sort of categorical frame of thought, this situation to situation problem, where we look at things. Some guy runs up to you and punches you in the head. As far as most people's reactions, they would look at that guy to be as the blame and fight him back specifically as far as revenge, never thinking about the familial or poverty conditions that created the highly probabilistic propensity for violence in the individual over time. So all the legal stuff comes into play. Can you really put someone on trial for their behavior? These are the contexts that are usually brought up. And of course, the economic system, for example, voluntary trade, it's a completely truncated idea. You see this rhetoric in libertarian philosophy that all acts of exchange are voluntary, therefore they're not coercive, which is completely ludicrous when you look at the larger order system pressures for people to trade, not to mention it's legally bound for trading. That is, property rights bind everything. But the motivation between people of what they're actually trading and why they need to eliminates this idea that it can possibly be voluntary and hence be free will, because there are ulterior motivations. There's always something underscoring why people are making these decisions. Therefore, it's not voluntary. There's a pressure. There is an actual coercion on some level or another. So there's other contexts I could name. Back to your punchline joke as it being up to us. Well, I'll put it this way. If we don't have free will, there must be some type of swarm intelligence that has said society is going to coalesce. The logic will present itself through biosocial pressures, and we will coalesce and create a new social system for evolutionary survival. All of the swarm logic will come into play, and each individual has no free will or no say in that. At the same time, we are learning organisms. You're listening to this broadcast, and you are absorbing information, but that could be, again, a part of the larger order swarm intelligence. So it's pointless to talk about it because it's one big paradox, but I hope you see my point. You have a second question. On your announcement that you'll be participating as a judge for a United Nations contest, it seems like it's a destructive organization. My question is, do you agree that the UN is a dysfunctional and destructive entity overall? And to answer your question, I'd say the UN is a colossal failure in its intentions. But like anything, it is a structure that has multiple tiers and multiple motivations. There are plenty of wonderful, well-meaning, world-conscious people that work at these global institutions. It doesn't mean that they are the ones with the most power and they are the ones that yield the most dominant values. All the world global institutions are Malthusian by nature, and it's a big facade when you look at the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and all these groups that claim to be for world peace and for alleviating poverty, when their track record does the exact opposite. So listen, the UNICEF participation is engaging kids about technology and thoughtful ideas about light specifically. I think that's fine. I don't mind being a part of that. Again, you can't just generalize an entire organization of this nature. There are thousands and thousands of people, multiple tiers of dedication, multiple levels of awareness, and there's perfectly fine work being done. So, in fact, as a word of advice in general, be careful condemning entire institutions, especially very large institutions of this nature. There are plenty of problems and criticisms. I would be the first to tell you how corrupt and distorted and how much I wish the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund would be shut down entirely. That doesn't mean that I would dismiss any conversation with those in those organizations, because a lot of people actually think they're doing good. They might not meet that end, but they're certainly trying. They don't understand the forces that are moving against them, or the ulterior elements that come into play through business collusion and political collusion in these attempts at improving society, ostensibly. So be careful with that type of worldview. And there was a third part to this question I already answered, so I'm going to move on to number 9. Peter, have you tried to get in contact with other established speakers like Naomi Klein, Noam Chomsky, Chris Hedges, Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, Russell Brand alike for public talks, even if discussions openly stated that not everyone has the exact same solution? It would be great to have this type of thing commence on YouTube or the like. I'm paraphrasing this. Yep. I hate to break it to everybody, but most people are not willing to address the foundation of the social system in the way the Zeitgeist Movement does. I don't know of anybody in the intelligentsia, even the counterculture intelligentsia, such as the Noam Chomskys and the like, that really are discussing social revolution with respect to a new social system being employed. I'm unaware of it. If there are people out there, I mean, I'm a big fan of everybody that's listed, but everyone stops short. Everyone's convinced that you can legislate the system into some type of proficient and humane state, and that's exactly the opposite of what the movement argues. The movement continues to be a fish out of water. Obviously, anyone that wants to talk about it is welcome to do so. We've had the movement brought up to people like Chomsky and others, and they've been dismissive, unfortunately. Russell Brand, who is definitely aware of the movement, refuses to engage it. I've personally reached out to his management and everything else because he invited me on his show years ago. Naomi Klein, tremendously good work. It's that false start stuff. It's just the same circular shit where people think that talking about the corruption and talking about how all these institutions need to change their behaviors within the system is somehow going to make a difference, and unfortunately it isn't. So it's very frustrating, but you can see why the movement is alienated or creates alienation with these groups, because it's seen as too extreme at this point. I think that will change. I think that is going to change within the next couple of years, because it's going to finally be understood that all these presuppositions of what needs to happen are never going to happen, because the system simply won't let it happen, whether it's the ecological crisis or whether it's the social crisis. So, and question 10, I believe. Currently, are there any social media outlets, Facebook pages, mobile apps, websites dedicated to linking all the activist movements and helping us stay connected? If not, would TZM or anyone interested be willing to help start one, or to provide me with some useful info on the best ways for me to accomplish this? I think I understand your question being, is there a central hub for it all? The TZM Global, the zeitgeistmovement.com, has links to just about everything in the so-called web ring. There's also an app that was made that, in fact, we're getting the language version of this thing finally done. I just actually got the beta for that, and it'll also be on Android. So yeah, there's a free iPhone app, and will be a free Android app in about 15 languages or so, and that connects to all the major websites and Facebook pages as well. Now, looking at the rest of your question, it looks like you're looking for something a little bit more detailed, and then it looked like some other people had followed up on your post as well. Yep, I will talk about the Global Redesign Institute and the Localized Solutions Project and the Collaborative Design System in a moment as well. I believe there's a question on all of those, because you're asking about global resource management design. This is a very complicated project, and it's been long overdue, but it's also something that needs dedicated people. It can't be pure volunteer because it's simply too difficult. It needs financing behind it. Moving on. Question 11. There's a problem I keep running into, Peter. People today seem to run on emotion and ego, both of which I believe have led us to where a global society is today. I'm a practicing Buddhist, and one of the teachings I've learned from studying Buddhism is practicing awareness. By practicing awareness for the last 15 years, I've found that emotions and ego lead to the majority of the problems we face today. By being aware of an emotion as it happens, you are better able to handle it and provide a more logical-based reaction to a given situation. Has any thought been given to education in respect to how to progress past emotion and ego? That's a very good question. I've always practiced witness myself, even though I'm a very emotional person, and backed into a corner, I will behave very emotionally. That is definitely my nature, which I don't put myself down too much about it. The opposite, of course, is to be a cold sociopath, but I do agree that it does get in the way of logical thought, and we all have to be aware of our emotions. If you're a Buddhist, you might be familiar with the term witness. This is something that I practice occasionally, especially if I'm particularly agitated, where you just look at yourself from an abstract third party and you monitor yourself. So if you're angry, and then you can do it, you say, oh, I'm angry. You look at yourself from the outside and you watch yourself being angry. Suddenly you emotionally detach if you're able to do that successfully. It's a good practice. I encourage it. Nothing metaphysical about it. I completely agree. Emotion and ego, they go together, and they're a part of our biological survival and evolution, and we need to inhibit. There's that word, inhibition, which is really what defines our ability as human beings to be conscious, that separates us from the impulsive restrictions of most species. We can inhibit our natural or seemingly natural processes and recondition our reactions so we can control ourselves. So I completely agree. So I practice the witness. I encourage others as well. Number 12. Again, this is a lot of text. I can't read all of it. I will break it down. I've observed a sizable number of skilled people in the movement whose main problems with participation appear to be a lack of direction, a lack of commitment towards certain goals, and a lack of autonomy. Shouldn't the movement try to accommodate for these shortcomings of some of its otherwise useful, talented members by providing them something to do? If not, I feel there may be a great waste of potential. Having a large number of official projects for people to choose from and contribute to seems like an idea worth considering. The internal structure and organization of the Zeitgeist Movement itself is a system with distinct rules and processes. In that system, and subsequently the movement itself, currently operating is that system currently operating at peak efficiency? When it comes down to it, do you feel the movement currently has a good organizational, instructional, and process structure, or do you see room for improvements and optimizations? What are the current and future plans for this? I would have to say that no, the movement does not have a good organizational and process structure. There's tremendous room for improvements and optimizations. And as far as future plans of projects, I can only hope that others are willing to step up and help out in this regard. The chapter basis of the movement has attempted to freely allow those with regional interests to do as they wish, because there's very little instruction given by the movement, as you point out. But however, there is a tremendous amount of autonomy, which I'll say in contradiction to what you've pointed out. The movement does nothing to inhibit anyone's behavior in any chapter, as long as it's not negatively representative of the movement or something negative or violent or racist or any of the stuff that you would never even imagine to occur anyway. We are very open in that regard, but we're too open, I suppose, in the sense that there aren't more projects set up. And to be perfectly honest, the thought of this, because of my experience with the movement of 6 years, is to throw my hands in the air and just be exhausted, because there's only so much that some of us can do. The chapter administration was supposed to work, which it does, but here's how it's supposed to work, just in case it's been lost over time. It's all documented, by the way, in the book and on the website. is when people have ideas for projects or things to do, they come together at the international chapter meeting. The coordinators of each chapter comes together with ideas presented by their group, and then the ideas are shared within the international community. All the coordinators of each chapters talk on a global level about future projects and ideas. And it is really in that hotbed that you would expect things to arise. And there's been plenty of talk throughout the years. I'm at a loss, though, and I'm actually very frustrated that we don't have more of this stuff consistently working forward. There were developers teams prior. There was a lot of stuff that's come in and out. But being the open movement that we are as a volunteer structure, it's very hard to do so. Some talk has been made about establishing some nonprofits to work in different ways to make sure that there's more time and basically fiscal compensation for certain projects. I've always shied away from making the movement centric around money, but when it comes to actual projects or actual interests or press stuff, so I think it's getting to a point where that might be needed, as much as I hate to say it. So if you're interested in these ideas, then I think it's time they're brought up once again in a larger order way. I will probably talk about this a little bit in Germany. In fact, I think some other people are as well. But you're listening to a person that has no life, is condemned, has lost a tremendous amount of physical health working with the movement. I've run out of personal capacity, and I tried my best to give guidance throughout the years, but it's really not that easy. And everyone's a volunteer, everyone's strapped, everyone's trying to do their best. But this is the state of frustration, and I couldn't agree more that if there's anything that needs to happen after Z-Day, it's a concentrated discussion about tangible social and design projects to really embrace more people and keep people motivated. Question 13, what do you say to people that say the movement isn't actually achieving anything? Well, I've already addressed that. The movement actually has achieved a great deal of general awareness. You can see this by tracking keywords through Google. You can see this by measuring all the rhetoric shifts that have occurred in the sustainability movements and civil rights movements, all the organizations out there that have become incredibly more acutely aware of what's happening to the system structure. It's not quite there yet, but you can't dismiss the effect the movement has had. If it wasn't for the Zeitgeist Movement, I'm pretty much convinced Occupy wouldn't have existed. I think that the foundation of the Zeitgeist Movement set the stage because the timing was perfect, and it's just one of those chain reactions. We'll never know for sure. If you listen to a lot of the rhetoric of well-documented activist celebrities, I've seen increased gravitation towards the subject matter that we speak of. So you don't really know where these seeds are planted, and you just have to keep bridging and bridging and bridging, and people make it their own. In fact, that's what you want. You want people to make it their own. There's a unique paradox to this where you want a mass movement, but at the same time you want people to realize this for themselves. Whether they choose to join the identified mass movement, the Zeitgeist Movement, is one thing. But if they're engaging in this rhetoric at all, they're a part of the movement regardless, even if they don't identify with it. So, second question, you said you were going to make an essay regarding free speech and action and how they are the same thing in their outcomes. How is that going? I'm sorry, I have no memory of that, John. That was second question of number 13. If you want to submit another question next time I do this, clarifying that. I don't remember that one at all. I'm also very tired at the moment. So, number 14, have you or any other key person within TZM tried to contact Russell Brand about a natural law resource-based economy, blah, blah, blah? And yes, of course we have, and he hasn't responded. What about contacting Vice? Vice, I have no idea if Vice has ever been contacted about the Zeitgeist Movement. That would be fun if they had. Vice does a lot of great investigative stuff. Second part of this question, as a member of Reddit and a subscriber of TZM subreddit, I hope we could see a TZM AMA Ask Me Anything at some point in the future. This has been suggested, thank you, and I think that's a great idea. We'll see what happens. I'm happy to do that when I have some time. It's just one more type of outreach, another thing that someone can do. Other people on the lecture team maybe can step up to do that as well. The floodgates are open. I've got 5 minutes left, so let's continue on. After what seems to have been a much heated discussion on veganism on the Zeitgeist Movement's Facebook page recently, I participated by suggesting that when you have systems allowing for multiple possibilities, all made manifest by natural forces and historically known to have occurred before, it is unreasonable to expect the population to choose one possibility to the exclusion of all others based solely on ethical principles, and that each person would choose what is most beneficial if access is available based on survival pressures. Unfortunately, the discussion quickly degraded into vegan versus non-vegan. Vegan, I think some individual efforts were made to present scientific evidence, but I stated that telling an individual that they are psychopathic, animal, and environmental. I'm sorry, it says that he stated that telling an individual that they are a psychopathic, animal, and environmental killers, which was a quote apparently, for eating animal-based life probably will not sway a person to do anything than retaliate in kind. How was the reasoning in my general response? I asked because I have recognized you as one who can keep a cool head. I have an interest in philosophy. Okay, I see the question. We had a vegan attack, so to speak, on the Facebook page earlier this week, where about 100 posts, which I don't know what the logic is. Again, back to the prior thing, the Zeitgeist Movement book talks about the importance of, or the relevance of sustainable agriculture, as I already said earlier, and moving away from animal-based agriculture. And actually in Z-Day 2015 in Germany, we have a person speaking on that very subject, which is a vegan. So the fact that anyone would attack the movement for that, given that we've talked about this issue, it's just this righteousness, unfortunately, that happens in ideological pockets. And then the groupthink and the mob mentality takes hold, and you end up with this belligerence, sadly enough. To answer your question, yes, your reasoning is great. I mean, all arguments have contexts, and if you want to galvanize a movement towards a common end, as I explained earlier, you don't work to insult people. I learned this the hard way, by the way. Using derisive language and mocking people and all these things that are so common to what has become an arrogant subculture, multiple arrogant subcultures that stand behind some kind of science or moral purview is annoying. I don't engage it anymore. I am turned off very rapidly when I see people behave that way. Okay, final question. The next post is a series of statements. I don't have time to read it. I apologize. If you want to repost it later, that's fine. It's not a question. Everyone's got to be a little more respectful of this. Final question. Since TZM advocates the best of science applied to society, presumably this would reference the scientific consensus position. However, it seems TZM is selective about which consensuses it embraces. For example, it acknowledges climate change, but doesn't seem to embrace the vast consensuses of the safety and usefulness of both GMOs and nuclear energy. Why is this so, and what metric is being used to determine which consensuses TZM adheres to? I have to admit the presumption of your question is quite curious. First of all, the movement doesn't really take any position on GMOs, nor has it taken any official position on nuclear. There might very well be a circumstance when nuclear energy is the last resort, or it might be most efficient. However, as many countries are proving in Europe, the emergence to other renewables in a systems context, there's very high odds we can exceed our power needs, as noted in the book, by the way, without nuclear or without hydrocarbons. So the mixed systems reuse, use schemes, localized energy and distributed in grids and in communities, coupled with larger order geothermal plants and lots of other things, shows a tremendous amount of potential. Does that say that nuclear is officially off limits? No, that's never been stated. And if you're implying that there's a scientific consensus that nuclear is, quote, safe, I'm not quite sure how you would arrive at that conclusion, since we're referring to vulnerability and acts of God, so to speak, that disrupt these things. These are mistakes that are made, problems that occur that have very, very catastrophic effects when they do, which is really the main argument against nuclear at this point in time. Coming back to GMOs, the skepticism that's out there, I think, is great for healthy debate. I could go on a long tangent I don't have time for about the manipulation of scientific consensus when it comes to very, very profitable industries such as surrounds the agricultural business. But that should be common sense to anyone that's truly thinking scientifically when it comes to the true nature of the world and the corruption that's inherent. But once again, the movement has no position on GMOs. All right, 10 seconds left. Thank you very much, everybody. I will talk to you all soon. Please come to Z-Day in Germany if you're in Europe. If not, start your own. Everyone have a good one. Bye.